Hello, my name is Brandy Shake Snyder, and I'm a student of Dr. Powell's Asian religion class at LSUA. Today I'll be discussing the topic of nonviolence in both Hindu and Buddhist religions. There are many similarities and differences within these religions. Before we dive into the aspect of nonviolence, which they both share, let's get a general overview of Hinduism and Buddhism. General beliefs in Buddhists include meditation and the Eightfold Path of right view, right intention, right speech, and right action. Hindus believe in meditation, yoga, contemplation, yajna, or communal worship, and offerings in the temple. Buddhists concentrate on awakening. Their awakening begins through recognition, experience, and validation. The truth of suffering, known as dukkha, the truth, the cause of suffering, otherwise known as samudhi, the truth of the ending of suffering, and the truth of the path that frees us from suffering, known as magga. Buddhism, one lives a regulated life, practices meditation, and renounces false beliefs. By doing this, one will either achieve peace of nirvana or transform into Buddha and proceed to be free from all suffering. On the other hand, Hinduism seeks to comprehend Brahma, existence from within Atman, which is roughly translated to self or soul. In Hinduism, achieving the highest life entails letting go of one's physical distractions in order to finally comprehend one's own Brahma nature. Comparing Hinduism and Buddhism, both seek to live a life of nonviolence. However, they go about them in separate ways. Thomas Edison was quoted saying, "Nonviolence leads to the highest ethics, which is the goal of evolution. Until we stop harming all other living beings, we're all savages." And Mahatma Gandhi states, "An unjust law is itself a species of violence. Arrest for its breach is more so. Now the law of nonviolence says that violence should be resisted not by counterviolence, but by nonviolence. This I do by breaking the law and by peacefully submitting to the arrest and imprisonment." One may agree that understanding violence or nonviolence is different for everyone. What one considers violent may be customary or tradition for someone else. Diving into the adoption and adaptation of nonviolence in both the lives of the Hindu and the Buddhist religions, while comparing similarities and differences, one may use this information provided to create a more peaceful world, or at least a more peaceful existence. Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines nonviolence as an abstention from violence as a matter of principle, the state of being nonviolent, or the avoidance of violence. But violence in this world refers to the intentional use of physical force against another person. In Hinduism, violence, or hisma, also refers to deliberate use of physical force to cause harm to another person as well as oneself. Hinduism and nonviolence. The use of words, thoughts, desires with the intent to do harm to another person is also covered by this term. Violence also includes acts committed with the intent to inflict pain or suffering to another person. Any modification arising from such actions is deemed the result of violence. Spiritually speaking, violence refers to any act that disturbs, agitates, or otherwise alerts a person's physical mental state. It's only considered an act of violence if you intentionally damage someone else by using cruel language, harboring negative thoughts about them, formulating plans in your head to harm them, or invoking fear. Truthful love, compassion, and respect for all living things are the cornerstones of the Hindu ideology. It is exploring non-injury as a way to achieve harmony in one's environment, peace between peoples, and compassion within oneself. Nonviolence of the mind consists of not thinking maliciously of others, while nonviolence in speech is to refrain from using foul language, swearing, or arguing with others. In addition, nonviolence of actions is consciously avoiding injury to another person. But where did the idea of ahisma originate? Captured by two unique sources, the traditional Hindu thinkers and the 10 Buddhist Paramata. Hindu scholars of old held the idea of nonviolence was actually the idea of not harming living things because living things were divine, but the idea of nonviolence. The word ahisma is taken in a less literal sense to mean the absence of the use of violence or injury, love towards all beings, positive attitudes. Nonviolence is said to be a mental attitude of respect and compassion rather than a physical state. Ahisma also has its roots in the belief of the samsara cycle, or eternal cycle. According to Hindu philosophers, killing an animal would be essentially like killing a person, because they believe that a person's soul may reincarnate as an animal. This is especially so in cows, who they claim to be their sacred animals. Ahisma is found in many Hindu scriptures and predates Aryan culture. Its earliest known origin in text can also be traced back to the Rig Veda conception and is closely affiliated with dharma, or duty. The concept of ahisma does have exceptions to the rule of nonviolence. The warrior caste who would fight in a battle would have their sins dissipated by their acts of heroism in battle in order to secure advancement of all beings. A king may also destroy those who may deserve to be destroyed in order to protect his people and his kingdom. Wisdom is the culmination of all the Hindus' understanding of divine laws of reincarnation, karma, dharma, and the universal and sacred nature of all things. So, how do Hindus practice nonviolence? Hindus acknowledge that the mind is subject to many modifications, and it's almost impossible to live without disturbing others and oneself. The semi-secular practice, or postures, has become a main component of the term yoga. Yoga psychology and practices have been used for many thousands of years by its masters and practitioners to help people achieve harmony and balance in their minds and in their bodies in order to reach their full potential. According to a Hindu sage and a multi-religious practitioner who lived in the 19th century, psychological problems and emotional distress need to be seen in the context of a broader picture. Spiritual alienation is the source of our greatest pain. In medieval India, yoga was practiced as a type of meditation and employed to contact your Atman. As long as there are individuals pursuing liberation, there will be many types of yoga. These 4 branches of yoga, karma yoga, bhakti yoga, raja yoga, jnana yoga, are modified to suit various temperaments. Karma yoga is the action of selfless service. Bhakti yoga is the yoga of devotion through our works and love and devotion to a personal God. Raja yoga is the yoga of the Eightfold Path, while jnana yoga is the use of will and intellect. So, when is violence acceptable in the Hindu religion? War and violence are not primarily condemned by the contemporary Hinduism, not even Gandhi. According to Rahad Krishna, nonviolence as a mental condition differs from the non-resistance in that it is the absence of hatred and malice. We can't claim that aggression is inherently bad. Violence is acceptable and nonviolence is no longer an option. Gandhi himself backed the British in 1914 when they were fighting a just war. While nonviolence is not the highest ideal, one may resort to violence in a number of certain circumstances, say for one's duty in the case of a warrior or a butcher, or in service to God, or one's obligation to uphold righteousness, as in the case of a king or ruler. when one offers his own life as a sacrifice to God, participates in war and self-defense or a righteous cause. Hindu scriptures acknowledge the destructive nature of wars, but also recognize their importance in ensuring the order and regularity of society. The Vedas contain many hymns seeking victory of patron kings and destruction of their enemies. For a Hindu warrior, dying in the battlefield was the highest honor. So now let's talk about Buddhism and nonviolence. According to the Buddhist perspective, our minds are the root of all forms of violence. So conducting a critical examination of conscience enables us to better understand the internal dynamics of violence. Buddhism is centered on the understanding of reality as a mindset construct, critically analyzing how the mind becomes the source of suffering and contemplating and putting into practice the means of resolving it. And in the analysis, the Four Noble Truths play a crucial part. In comparison to Hinduism, the Buddhist practice of nonviolence was not just a theoretical concept for those in ancient India who made freedom their main goal, and for the enlightened minds who concentrated on spiritual practices. The Buddha actively used it to settle disputes between rulers of his period and stop wars. He counseled people to follow the eightfold path of right living and abstain from doing wrong to harm other people. He warned against being cruel. He focused on individual conviction. One must be persistent, make persistent observation a lifelong habit. In addition to patience, calmness, and integrity, the road also calls for consciousness, meditation, and observation. A steady and focused thought is necessary in order to make a mindful observation of oneself. Only sincerity, harmony, and humility and honesty can help you achieve this. Buddhist scripture condemns violence in every form. However, Buddhists have historically used scriptures to justify violence or form exceptions to commit violence for various reasons. There are 6 justifications to use violence in Buddhism. War may be justified when converting non-believers, defending Buddhist property, territory, or teachings, where killing is seen as an act of compassion, such as to put a person out of their misery or punish those who have practiced Buddhism wrongly. Illusionary death justification, where there is no murderer or victim, because both are seen belonging to the mundane levels of truth. Arguments where karma of killing is obviated by having a skillful intention. Or arguments where killing is merely enacting the deserts of karma, which were coming to the victim anyway. Number 3, religious nationalism justifications. Dual state justifications, when a state may be governed by a ruler or religion hand in hand. Buddhists make allowances for the heads of state to use violence to preserve sovereignty, law, and order by violent means. Buddhist excuses for violence involving Buddhist nationalism, special mindfulness is needed when push comes to shove, and shaming comes in forms of accusations. Relativistic justification for violence is usually invoked when protagonists choose violence as a lesser of 2 evils. An example of this is the justification of killing one to save many. Number 5, depraved era justifications. Extreme times call for extreme measures. And the non-dogma justification based on non-attachment to dogma, reversing all values, aimed at highlighting the mistake of thinking Buddhahood to be localized a particular individual and externalized in another. Violent actions and thoughts, actions which harm and debase others, and thoughts which contemplate the same, stand in the way of spiritual growth and in self-conquest, which leads to the goal of existence. And they're normally deemed unskilled. In Buddhism, to take refuge in Dharma, one of the 3 jewels, One should not harm other sentient beings. Nirvana Sutra states, by taking refuge in the precious Dharma, one's mind should be free from hurting or harming others. The Buddha reportedly stated, victory breeds hatred, and the defeated live in pain. Happily, the peaceful live, giving up victory and defeat. In conclusion, one may say that living a life of nonviolence is impossible. However, two significant figures who practiced nonviolence in our modern times were Mahatma Gandhi and the Dalai Lama. Nonviolence requires work, repetition, and dedication to live. It entails becoming conscious of any beliefs that might prevent us from choosing to be kind to others, acting without harming others, and seeing humanity in all people. The Dalai Lama is quoted saying, I consider nonviolence to be compassion in action. It doesn't mean weakness or cowering in fear, or simply doing nothing. It's to act without violence, motivated by compassion. In light of the research of this paper, a few quotes from Mother Teresa came to mind. The quote of this great saint may not be well known, but here are my few favorites. I alone cannot change the world, but I can cast a stone across the waters and create many ripples. The second, I would prefer you make mistakes in kindness than work miracles in unkindness. And lastly, if you judge people, you have no time to love them. In closing, the practices of nonviolence, no matter which religion, are essential to a world filled with hatred and malice and self-preservation. Thank you for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed my presentation on nonviolence and the Hindu and Buddhist religions.